The Ural Mountains loomed ominously against the gray sky, their jagged peaks piercing the low-hanging clouds like teeth in a monstrous maw. Nestled deep within this unforgiving landscape stood a nondescript concrete building, its cold exterior belying the horrors contained within. This was the domain of Dr. Irina Sokolov, a woman whose brilliance was matched only by her ruthlessness. I am Nadia, and this is my story of survival, madness, and the depths of human depravity. The sterile fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Dr. Sokolov's heels clicked against the linoleum floor. Her face, once beautiful, now bore the harsh lines of a woman consumed by her work. She paused before a two-way mirror, observing the emaciated figures huddled in the room beyond. "Fascinating," she murmured, her voice devoid of empathy. "Subject 17 has begun exhibiting signs of psychosis. Note the twitching and muttering." Her assistant, a nervous young man named Dmitri, scribbled furiously in his notebook. "Dr. Sokolov, don't you think we've taken this far enough? The ethics board..." Irina's hand lashed out, striking Dmitri across the face with a resounding crack. "The ethics board is irrelevant," she hissed, her eyes blazing with fanatical intensity. "We are on the cusp of a breakthrough that will revolutionize human endurance. A few lives are inconsequential in the face of such progress." As Dmitri cowered, nursing his reddening cheek, Irina's mind drifted to the events that had led her to this point. The global pandemic had ravaged supply chains, leaving millions starving. But where others saw tragedy, Irina saw opportunity. Her proposal to study the psychological effects of extreme starvation had been met with horror by her colleagues. Undeterred, she had found backers in the shadowy corners of the government, those who saw the potential for weaponizing hunger. Now, as food shortages gripped the world outside, Irina had all the test subjects she could ever need. In the observation room, I pressed my ear against the cold wall, straining to hear the conversation beyond. My once voluptuous frame had withered to a skeletal form, my skin stretched taut over protruding bones. But while my body weakened, my mind remained sharp, fueled by an unquenchable desire to survive. I glanced at my fellow subjects, their sunken eyes and hollow cheeks a mirror of my own deterioration. Some rocked back and forth, lost in their own private hells. Others stared vacantly into space, hope long since abandoned. And then there was Alexei, his gaze fixed upon me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. Alexei had been a soldier once, his muscular frame now a mockery of its former strength. In the early days of our captivity, he had been a source of comfort, his quiet strength a beacon in the darkness. But as the hunger gnawed at our bodies and minds, I had seen a change come over him. The way he looked at me now was not with compassion, but with a predatory gleam that spoke of barely contained violence. A sudden commotion drew my attention. In the corner, two subjects were fighting over a scrap of moldy bread that had somehow found its way into our prison. Their emaciated bodies collided with surprising force, bony fingers clawing at each other's faces. Blood welled from scratch marks, and the sickening crack of breaking bones echoed through the room. Guards rushed in, their well-fed forms a stark contrast to our wasted bodies. They pulled the combatants apart, but not before one of them had sunk his teeth into the other's arm, tearing away a chunk of flesh. The victim's agonized screams mingled with the attacker's animalistic growls as he chewed the raw meat, eyes rolling back in ecstasy. I turned away, bile rising in my throat. But a small, traitorous part of my mind whispered that the cannibal had the right idea. After all, there was protein going to waste. I shook my head violently, horrified by my own thoughts. I had to hold on to my humanity, no matter the cost. It was the only thing separating me from the monsters who had imprisoned us here. As night fell, bringing no respite from the constant illumination of the fluorescent lights, I retreated to my corner. Sleep was a luxury few of us could afford anymore, our bodies too racked with pain and our minds too haunted by nightmares. Instead, I closed my eyes and let my thoughts drift to happier times. I remembered my life before this hell, a promising young scientist, eager to make a difference in the world. How naive I had been, volunteering for what I thought was a study on nutrition in times of crisis. The irony was bitter on my tongue. A hand on my shoulder jolted me from my reverie. I opened my eyes to find Alexei looming over me, his gaunt face twisted into a rictus grin. "Nadia," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've figured it out. The way to survive." I tried to pull away, but his grip was surprisingly strong. "What are you talking about, Alexei?" His eyes gleamed with a feverish light. "We need to eat, to stay strong, and there's only one source of food left in this room." My blood ran cold as I realized his meaning. "No, Alexei, we can't. We're not animals." He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Animals survive, Nadia. Humans die clinging to their precious morals. I won't die here, and neither will you, if you join me." With surprising speed, Alexei lunged at me, his teeth bared. I brought my knee up, catching him in the stomach. He wheezed, momentarily stunned, giving me the opportunity to scramble away. But in my weakened state, I didn't get far before he was on me again. We grappled on the floor, a tangle of skin and bones. His fingers dug into my arms, drawing blood. I clawed at his face, feeling skin tear beneath my nails. In desperation, I brought my head forward, smashing it into his nose. There was a sickening crunch, and Alexei reeled back, blood streaming down his face. Taking advantage of his disorientation, I staggered to my feet and ran. The other subjects watched our struggle with dead eyes, too far gone to intervene or even care. I pounded on the locked door, screaming for help that I knew wouldn't come. Alexei recovered quickly, advancing on me with murderous intent. "Don't fight it, Nadia," he growled. "This is what they want, to see how far we'll go. Let's show them." As he reached for me, the door suddenly swung open. Dr. Sokolov stood there, flanked by guards. Her cold eyes took in the scene before her, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Interesting," she mused. "Subject 23 has initiated cannibalistic behavior earlier than projected. Dmitri, make a note." The guards moved to restrain Alexei, who thrashed and snarled like a rabid animal. As they dragged him away, Dr. Sokolov turned her attention to me. "And you, Subject 42. You've shown remarkable resilience. Perhaps it's time we moved you to more advanced testing." Before I could react, a sharp pain blossomed in my neck. The world began to spin, and darkness crept in at the edges of my vision. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was Dr. Sokolov's face, her eyes alight with scientific curiosity and something far more sinister. I awoke strapped to a cold metal table, bright lights searing my eyes. Dr. Sokolov loomed over me, a scalpel glinting in her hand. "Ah, good. You're awake. I prefer my subjects conscious for this part." "Why are you doing this?" I croaked, my throat parched and raw. Sokolov's face softened for a moment, a flicker of humanity shining through her clinical exterior. "You must understand, Nadia. The world is changing. Resources are dwindling. If humanity is to survive, we must adapt. My work here will ensure that the strong endure, while the weak, well, they serve their purpose." As the scalpel descended towards my abdomen, I closed my eyes, bracing for the pain. But it never came. Instead, there was a thunderous explosion, and the room shook violently. Alarms blared, and I heard shouts and gunfire in the distance. Dr. Sokolov cursed, dropping the scalpel. Impossible. How did they find us? Taking advantage of her distraction, I summoned what little strength I had left and wrenched my arm free from its restraint. I grabbed the fallen scalpel and, with a primal scream, plunged it into Sokolov's throat. Hot blood sprayed across my face as she stumbled back, eyes wide with shock and betrayal. As Sokolov collapsed, gurgling her last breaths, the door burst open. Men in hazmat suits rushed in, weapons at the ready. "We've found a survivor," one of them called out. "Get a medical team in here, stat." As they worked to free me from the table, my mind struggled to process what was happening. Was this a rescue or just another layer of the nightmare? The lead rescuer removed his mask, revealing a kind face etched with concern. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now. We're with the International Red Cross. We've been tracking Dr. Sokolov's operation for months." Relief washed over me, followed quickly by a tidal wave of emotion. Tears streamed down my face as the full weight of my ordeal crashed down upon me. The rescuer held me gently, murmuring words of comfort as I sobbed. As they carried me out of the facility, I caught glimpses of the chaos around us. Other rescue teams were freeing the remaining test subjects, many of whom seemed beyond help. I saw Alexei being restrained, his eyes wild as he snapped at anyone who came near. Outside, the harsh mountain air stung my lungs, but it had never tasted sweeter. As the medical team worked to stabilize me, I stared up at the vast expanse of sky, marveling at its beauty. I had survived, but at what cost? The horrors I had witnessed, the things I had done, they would haunt me forever. And yet, as the rescue helicopter lifted off, carrying me away from that place of nightmares, I felt a flicker of hope. Humanity had shown me its darkest face, but also its capacity for compassion. As long as there were people willing to fight against the darkness, perhaps there was still hope for us all. But in the deepest recesses of my mind, a small voice whispered a chilling truth. The hunger would always be there, waiting. And in the right circumstances, any one of us could become the monster.